The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Maya Rodriguez sat cross-legged on her grandmother's weathered wooden porch, chocolate ice cream dripping down her chin and onto her favorite purple dress. At 3 years old, Maya possessed the kind of wide-eyed curiosity that made her notice everything: the way ladybugs walked in perfectly straight lines, how her grandmother's wind chimes sang different songs depending on which way the breeze blew, and especially how grown-ups always seemed to miss the most important details about everything. Rosa Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron, the scent of fresh tortillas trailing behind her like a warm embrace. "Mia, you're making a mess," she said with the kind of loving exasperation that only grandmothers could master. Maya giggled, swinging her legs back and forth, her small sandaled feet barely reaching the edge of the porch step. The neighborhood hummed with typical afternoon activity. On Maple Street, Mrs. Henderson from across the way struggled with paper grocery bags that seemed determined to escape her grasp, oranges rolling across the sidewalk like escaped marbles. Mr. Petrov tinkered under the hood of his ancient Buick, muttering what Maya's grandmother always called colorful language in Russian. Children's laughter echoed from the park 3 blocks over, mixing with the distant sound of a radio playing mariachi music from someone's open window. Maya licked her ice cream cone thoughtfully, watching a silver sedan approach from the east. Something about the car caught her attention. It was moving too fast for their quiet residential street, weaving slightly between the yellow lines like her cousin Roberto did when he played video games. The driver's window was partially down, and even from her perch on the porch, Maya could see something white wrapped around his left hand gripping the steering wheel. "Abuela," Maya started to say, pointing toward the street, but Rosa had already retreated inside to check on the tortillas. That's when time seemed to fracture into slow, terrible pieces. The screech of tires cut through the peaceful afternoon, like a chainsaw through silk. Maya watched, frozen with her ice cream cone halfway to her mouth, as the silver car struck Mrs. Henderson with a sickening thud that would echo in her dreams for years to come. The elderly woman's body flew through the air in an impossibly graceful arc, her groceries exploding in every direction: apples bouncing like rubber balls, milk cartons bursting open in white geysers, cereal boxes splitting and spilling their contents like confetti at the world's worst party. While adults began screaming and rushing from their houses, Maya remained perfectly still, her 3-year-old mind processing details that the panicking grown-ups would miss entirely. She saw the driver's face clearly through the windshield. A young man with dark hair and a work shirt, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stared in horror at what he'd done. His left hand, wrapped in white gauze and medical tape, trembled violently on the steering wheel. For just a moment, his eyes met Maya's across the distance, and she saw something that would haunt her tiny heart. He wasn't angry or mean like the bad guys in her picture books. He was scared, sick scared, the same way she felt when she had nightmares about monsters under her bed. The car lurched forward, tires smoking against the asphalt, and disappeared around the corner toward downtown Phoenix, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt rubber and the chaos of a shattered afternoon. Rosa Rodriguez burst through the screen door, her flour-covered apron now seeming absurdly domestic against the backdrop of tragedy unfolding in their peaceful street. She scooped Maya into her arms, just as neighbors began pouring out of their houses like ants from a disturbed hill. Mr. Petrov dropped his wrench and ran toward Mrs. Henderson's motionless form. Mrs. Chun from 2 houses down was already on her phone with 911, her voice high and shaky as she tried to describe what had happened. Within minutes, the street transformed into a symphony of sirens and flashing lights. Paramedics worked frantically over Mrs. Henderson, while police officers began the methodical process of interviewing witnesses. Maya watched it all from the safety of her grandmother's arms, her chocolate ice cream long forgotten and melting into a sticky puddle on the porch floor. That's when Detective Sarah Chun arrived with Rex. The German Shepherd emerged from the patrol car like something out of Maya's favorite cartoon, massive, noble, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. His handler, Detective Chun, was a petite Asian woman whose calm professionalism somehow made the chaos feel more manageable. Rex trotted beside her with the confidence of someone who had seen every kind of human tragedy and maintained his dignity through all of it. While Detective Chun began interviewing the scattered witnesses, Maya wiggled out of her grandmother's grip and walked purposefully toward the magnificent dog. Rosa called after her, but Maya was already kneeling beside Rex, her small hands buried in his thick fur. The crying man had hurt fingers. Maya whispered directly into Rex's ear, her voice so quiet that even Rosa couldn't hear from 5 feet away. He smelled like Grandpa's medicine, and his car was making sad noises. He didn't mean to hurt the nice lady. He was scared sick, not mean mad. Rex's ears perked forward with laser focus, and he made a low, rumbling sound deep in his throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a whimper, but something that sounded almost like understanding. He turned his massive head to stare directly into Maya's eyes, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, dog and child communicated in a language that had no words. Detective Chun glanced over, raising an eyebrow at the interaction, but dismissing it as typical toddler behavior with animals. She had no way of knowing that she'd just witnessed the first piece of evidence that would eventually solve her case, delivered by a 3-year-old girl to a police dog who somehow, impossibly, seemed to understand every word. Detective Sarah Chun stared at her computer screen through bleary eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct casting shadows across a dozen witness statements that might as well have been describing different planets. 3 days had passed since the hit and run on Maple Street, and she felt no closer to finding the driver than she had standing in the middle of the debris field, watching Mrs. Henderson being loaded into an ambulance. "Blue sedan," she muttered, reading from Maria Santos's statement. The woman had been watering her roses when the accident happened, claimed she had a perfect view. But then there was George Petrov's account. Gray pickup truck, definitely. Ford, maybe 10 years old. Mrs. Chun from the corner house insisted it was a white SUV with tinted windows. The only thing the witnesses agreed on was that a vehicle had struck Mrs. Henderson and fled the scene. Rex lay sprawled across the cool linoleum floor beside her desk, his massive frame taking up enough space to make other officers step carefully around him. Usually, the German Shepherd would be alertly watching her work, ready to spring into action at the first sign they were heading out on a call. Instead, he seemed restless, frequently lifting his head to stare toward the precinct's front entrance, his ears perked as if listening for something only he could hear. "What's got into you, boy?" Detective Chun asked, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. Rex looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, made a sound that was almost conversational, and returned his gaze to the entrance. It was the same behavior he'd been displaying ever since they left the Rodriguez house yesterday, distracted, expectant, like he was waiting for someone who never arrived. The security camera situation was a complete disaster. The traffic light at Maple and 3rd had been vandalized 2 weeks earlier, its camera hanging uselessly by a tangle of wires that the city maintenance crew hadn't gotten around to fixing. The convenience store on the corner had cameras, but they pointed toward the parking lot and register, missing the street entirely. Even the bank's ATM camera, which should have captured the intersection, had been mysteriously malfunctioning. For the past month, Detective Chun pulled up the accident photos on her screen, studying them for the 100th time. Skid marks suggested the vehicle had been traveling at least 40 miles per hour in a 25 zone. The impact point showed Mrs. Henderson had been struck while crossing legally in the crosswalk, carrying groceries from Martinez Market 3 blocks away. Glass fragments near the scene were automotive, definitely from a headlight. But the crime? Lab's analysis revealed they could have come from any one of 12 different makes and models of vehicles. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams at Phoenix General. Mrs. H stable, but still critical. Family asking for updates on investigation. Detective Chun rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar pressure of a case going cold. Mrs. Henderson's daughter had flown in from Seattle, her son from Denver. They sat vigil beside their mother's hospital bed, while Detective Chun had nothing to offer except promises to keep looking and assurances that they were following every lead. The problem was, there weren't any real leads. She'd spent yesterday afternoon driving through every auto body shop and collision repair center within a 50-mile radius of Phoenix, showing photos of headlight glass to mechanics who all gave her the same sympathetic shake of their heads. No silver sedans with front-end damage. No nervous customers paying cash for quick repairs. No suspicious insurance claims filed in the past week. The canvassing had been equally fruitless. Door-to-door interviews throughout the neighborhood had produced well-meaning neighbors eager to help, but lacking any useful information. Everyone loved Mrs. Henderson. She was the kind of woman who brought cookies to new neighbors and remembered everyone's grandchildren's names. But when it came to the actual accident, it was as if the driver had materialized from thin air, struck down an innocent woman, and vanished back into the ether. Detective Chun closed her laptop and decided to make another visit to the Rodriguez house. Sometimes returning to the scene sparked new insights, and frankly, she was running out of options. Rosa Rodriguez had been gracious during their first interview, offering coffee and homemade cookies, while patiently answering questions about what she'd witnessed, which was essentially nothing. She'd been in the kitchen when the accident occurred, only emerging after hearing the screams and crash. Rex perked up immediately when Detective Chun reached for her keys, his tail beginning its familiar helicopter motion. But as they drove toward Maple Street, his behavior became increasingly agitated. He paced back and forth across the back seat, whining softly and pawing at the windows. By the time they pulled into the Rodriguez driveway, he was practically vibrating with anticipation. Rosa Rodriguez opened the front door before Detective Chun could knock. Maya balanced on her hip with juice box stains around her mouth and picture book clutched in her tiny hands. The little girl's eyes went immediately to Rex, and her face lit up like Christmas morning. The doggy came back, Maya announced, squirming to get down from her grandmother's arms. Mia, let the nice police lady come inside first, Rosa said, but Maya was already toddling toward Rex with the fearless confidence that only 3-year-olds possessed around 100-pound dogs. Detective Chun watched in amazement as Rex immediately calmed, his agitation evaporating the moment Maya's small hands touched his fur. He sat perfectly still, his head tilted attentively toward the child as she began chattering to him in the mixed English-Spanish that marked her grandmother's bilingual household. He's been acting strange since we were here before, Detective Chun mentioned to Rosa as they settled in the living room. Almost like I don't know, like he's trying to tell me something. Rosa poured coffee from a thermal carafe, the rich aroma mixing with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla that seemed to permeate every surface of her home. Maya's been talking about your dog constantly. She keeps saying he's sad because he knows something important, but can't tell anyone. Through the living room window, Detective Chun could see Maya sitting cross-legged on the front porch with Rex beside her, the massive dog's attention focused entirely on whatever 3-year-old wisdom she was sharing. The child pointed toward the street where the accident had occurred, her small voice carrying across the yard in animated conversation. She talks about the crying man with the hurt hand at least 10 times a day, Rosa continued, settling into her chair with a sigh. I keep telling her the man who got hurt was Mrs. Henderson, But she insists there was a crying man with bandages on his fingers. Children and their imaginations, you know. Detective Chun nearly dropped her coffee cup. In all the witness statements, all the interviews, no one had mentioned anything about an injured driver. But then again, no one else had been a 3-year-old sitting perfectly still on a front porch, watching everything with the kind of unwavering attention that adults lost somewhere along the way to becoming grown-ups. Outside, Rex suddenly stood and walked to the exact spot where the accident had occurred, his nose to the ground, circling in the methodical pattern he used when tracking a scent. Maya followed him, her tiny hands gesturing as she continued their one-sided conversation. Detective Chun set down her coffee cup and stared through the window, a cold realization beginning to creep up her spine. What if Maya hadn't been imagining things at all? Detective Sarah Chun found herself making the 20-minute drive to Maple Street every morning for the past week, drawn by an instinct she couldn't quite name. Each visit yielded the same result. Maya Rodriguez would abandon whatever 3-year-old activity she was engaged in and rush to Rex like they were long-lost friends. The massive German Shepherd, normally all business and professional restraint, would transform into something approaching playfulness around the tiny girl with chocolate-stained fingers and an endless supply of observations about the world. This particular Thursday morning arrived with the kind of desert heat that made Phoenix residents question their life choices. Detective Chun parked in the shade of Rosa Rodriguez's ancient mesquite tree, watching through her windshield as Maya emerged from the house dragging a stuffed elephant nearly as large as herself. The child spotted the patrol car immediately and began jumping up and down, pointing excitedly at Rex, visible through the rear window. "Abuela! Abuela! The doggy policeman is back!" Maya's voice carried across the yard with the kind of pure joy that made adults smile despite themselves. Rosa appeared in the doorway, shaking her head with fond exasperation. "That child has been asking about your dog every 10 minutes since breakfast," she called to Detective Chun as she approached the house. "You'd think Rex was her best friend in the world." Inside the cool interior of the Rodriguez home, Detective Chun accepted her usual cup of coffee while Maya positioned herself and her elephant in the center of the living room, clearly preparing for some kind of important announcement. Rex lay beside her with remarkable patience, allowing the child to use him as a backrest while she arranged her stuffed animal in what appeared to be a complex narrative involving a tea party and a dragon. "Mia, tell Detective Chun about your dreams," Rosa encouraged gently, settling into her favorite chair with her own coffee cup. "She's been having the same dream every night since the accident. Very specific details about that day." Maya looked up from her elaborate toy arrangement, her dark eyes suddenly serious in the way that only children could manage, one moment giggling about imaginary tea parties, and next contemplating the mysteries of the universe with philosopher's intensity. "It's not a dream, Abuela," Maya said, with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow adult. "Dreams are fuzzy and silly. This is real remembering." She turned her attention to Detective Chun, abandoning her toys entirely. "The doggy knows I saw the truth." Detective Chun felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice carefully neutral. After 15 years in law enforcement, she'd learned that the moment you showed too much interest in a child's statement was often the moment their natural storytelling instincts took over, turning facts into fantasy. "What kind of truth, Maya?" Maya stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the street where Mrs. Henderson had been struck. Rex immediately followed, positioning himself beside her like a furry guardian. "The doggy knows about the scared man with the hurt fingers," she said, pressing her small palms against the glass. "He was crying real tears, not pretend tears like when I want extra cookies." "What did this scared man look like?" Detective Chun asked, pulling out her notebook with deliberate casualness. Maya closed her eyes, her little forehead scrunching. with concentration. He had dark hair like Daddy, but messier. His shirt was blue like the sky when it's happy, and it had a name thing on it, like the man at the grocery store wears. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Detective Chun. His left hand, she held up her own left hand for emphasis, was wrapped in white cloth like when I fell off my bike and scraped my knee really bad. Rosa exchanged a meaningful glance with Detective Chun. None of these details had appeared in any witness statements. In fact, no other witness had mentioned seeing the driver clearly enough to describe clothing or injuries. "Maya," Detective Chun said carefully, "how close were you to the car when this happened?" "I was sitting right here on the porch eating ice cream," Maya replied, returning to her spot beside Rex. The scared man's car smelled funny through his window. Sweet yucky like Grandpa's medicine when he has to poke his finger and put the little machine on it. Detective Chun's pen froze over her notebook. Rosa's father had been diabetic before his death 2 years earlier. Maya would have been barely walking then, but children often retained sensory memories that adults dismissed. "Tell me about the smell, Maya. Can you describe it better?" Maya wrinkled her nose, clearly searching for words to describe something her 3-year-old vocabulary couldn't quite capture. She looked at Rex, who had been listening to every word with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for. "Tracking suspects. Rex knows the smell," she announced suddenly. "He told me what it means." Detective Chun felt a chill run down her spine despite the morning heat. "What did Rex tell you?" Maya giggled, apparently finding the question amusing. "Rex doesn't use words, silly. He uses nose thoughts. The scared man was sick different, not mean different. His body was making wrong smells because he was scared and his medicine wasn't working right." The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of children playing in a neighboring yard. Detective Chun stared at Maya, her mind racing through the implications of what she was hearing. A diabetic episode could explain erratic driving. The sweet acetone smell Maya described was consistent with diabetic ketoacidosis. And Rex, with his incredibly sensitive nose and training in medical detection, would absolutely have noticed those chemical signatures at the accident scene. "Maya," Detective Chun said, her voice barely above a whisper, "did you see where the scared man went after the accident?" Maya nodded solemnly. "He went that way." She pointed east toward downtown Phoenix, but not because he was bad. Because he was scared sick and didn't know what to do. Like when I broke Mommy's pretty cup and hid in my closet because I was afraid she'd be angry. Rosa Rodriguez had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. "Detective Chun," she said. Slowly, "Maya has never been wrong about things she says she remembers. When she was 2, she told us about a fire at the neighbor's house 3 days before it happened. Turned out there was faulty wiring that the fire inspector found later." Detective Chun looked at Rex, who had been completely still throughout. Maya's recitation, his intelligent eyes moving between the child and his handler, as if he was waiting for someone to finally understand what he'd been trying to communicate all along. "Maya," Detective Chun said, "would you be willing to tell other police officers what you just told me? It might help us find the scared man and make sure he gets the help he needs." Maya considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice deliberating constitutional law. She looked at Rex, who gave her what could only be described as an encouraging look, then back at Detective Chun. "Will Rex be there too? Because he knows I'm telling the truth, and grown-ups sometimes think kids make up stories." Detective Chun felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized this 3-year-old had just provided more concrete evidence than a week of professional investigation. "Yes, Maya, Rex will definitely be there." Maya smiled, satisfied, and returned to her stuffed elephant and elaborate tea party setup. But Detective Chun knew that everything had just changed. She had her witness, the most unlikely witness in the history of Phoenix law enforcement, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like the first real break in the case. Detective Sarah Chun hadn't slept in 36 hours, but adrenaline coursed through her veins like liquid lightning as she sat surrounded by coffee cups, computer printouts, and the methodical chaos of a case finally breaking open. Maya's detailed description had given her something she'd never had before: a real suspect profile. Male, dark hair, blue work shirt with name tag, bandaged left hand, diabetic, driving a silver sedan with front-end damage. The Phoenix General Hospital Records Office had initially been reluctant to share patient information, citing privacy laws and requiring warrants. But when Detective Chun explained she was investigating a hit-and-run that left an elderly woman fighting for her life, Dr. Patricia Williams in the emergency department became an unexpected ally. "I remember that case," Dr. Williams said, scrolling through her computer terminal while Detective Chun waited tensely beside her desk. "Construction worker. Came in around midnight 3 nights before your accident. James Mitchell, 34 years old. Severe lacerations on his left hand from a circular saw accident at a job site. Required 47 stitches and would have been extremely painful for days afterward." Detective Chun felt her pulse quicken. "Was he diabetic?" Dr. Williams nodded grimly. "Type 1, diagnosed in childhood. He was actually showing early signs of ketoacidosis when he came in, blood sugar dangerously high, probably from the stress and pain of his injury. We treated the hand lacerations, but also had to stabilize his glucose levels. I remember specifically warning him about driving while his blood sugar was unstable." The irony was bitter. A medical professional had warned James Mitchell about exactly the kind of impaired driving that would lead to tragedy just 3 days later. "Do you have his address and vehicle information from the insurance forms?" Detective Chun asked, her notebook already open. Within minutes, she had everything she needed. James Mitchell, 2247 Desert Rose Court, Apartment 3B, Silver 2018 Honda Accord, Arizona license plate, GBH 7429. Employed by Southwest Construction Company as a framing carpenter. Emergency contact listed as his mother in Tucson. Detective Chun drove toward Mitchell's apartment complex with Rex alert in the passenger seat, both of them sensing they were finally closing in on their suspect. The Desert Palms apartments were the kind of place where young professionals and college students lived, not luxury, but clean and well-maintained, with a community pool and small fitness center that suggested residents cared about their quality of life. Apartment 3B was on the second floor, accessible by an outdoor staircase that gave Detective Chun a clear view of the parking lot below. Her heart stopped as she spotted it immediately, a silver Honda Accord parked in space 47, spiderweb cracks spreading across the passenger side of the windshield, and a distinctive dent in the front bumper that matched perfectly with the impact pattern from the accident scene. But it was the man sitting on the apartment's small balcony that made Detective Chun's breath catch in her throat. James Mitchell sat in a plastic lawn chair, staring down at his bandaged left hand with the hollow expression of someone who had been carrying an unbearable weight. Even from the parking lot, she could see the blue work shirt hanging over the balcony railing, a Southwest Construction Company name tag still pinned to the chest pocket. Detective Chun called for backup before approaching, but something about Mitchell's posture, the defeated slope of his shoulders, the way he kept looking toward the damaged car told her this wasn't going to be a chase or confrontation. This was going to be a confession. She climbed the stairs slowly, Rex beside her, both of them trained to read the subtle signs of human distress. Mitchell looked up as they approached, and his face crumpled with relief rather than fear. "I've been waiting for you," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew someone would figure it out eventually. Detective Chun read him his rights, but Mitchell waved them away with his unbandaged right hand. I want to tell you what happened, he said. I need to tell someone what happened. The story poured out of him like water from a burst dam. The construction accident that had left his hand mangled and infected. The pain medication that had interfered with his diabetes management. The morning of the hit and run when his blood sugar had spiked dangerously high, leaving him disoriented and lightheaded behind the wheel of his car. I was trying to get to the pharmacy to pick up my insulin prescription, Mitchell explained, tears streaming down his face. I knew I shouldn't be driving, but I was scared. My blood sugar was so high I could barely think straight. Everything felt like I was underwater. He described the accident from his perspective, the confusion, the terror, the split second when he realized he'd struck someone. I saw her flying through the air, and I knew I'd done something terrible. But I was so panicked, so sick, I just kept driving. I thought maybe if I got home, maybe if I got my insulin, maybe I could think clearly enough to figure out what to do. Detective Chan listened, taking careful notes, while Rex sat perfectly still beside her chair. The dog's behavior was markedly different from his usual alert posture during interrogations, calmer, almost sympathetic, as if he could sense that this wasn't a hardened criminal, but a terrified man who had made a tragic mistake. I've been sitting here for a week, Mitchell continued, wanting to turn myself in, but too scared to face what I'd done. I keep thinking about that woman, wondering if she's okay, knowing she's probably not okay because of me. Mrs. Henderson is alive, Detective Chun said gently. She's in critical condition, but she's alive. Mitchell's sob of relief was audible throughout the apartment complex. Thank God. Thank God. I was sure I'd killed her. The confession continued for another hour, Mitchell providing details that perfectly matched Maya's observations, and Rex's detection of diabetic distress at the scene. He described his mental state, the confusion, the sweet metallic taste in his mouth that signaled dangerous glucose levels, the way his vision had been blurry and his thinking clouded. I want to face whatever consequences come from this, Mitchell said finally. I want to pay for what I did, and I want to make sure Mrs. Henderson gets the best medical care possible. I have some savings and insurance through the construction company. As Detective Chon prepared to transport Mitchell to the station for formal booking, she found herself thinking about Maya Rodriguez and her insistence that the driver was scared sick, not mean different. Once again, a 3-year-old's pure perception had cut through adult complexity to identify the truth that everyone else had missed. Rex seemed to sense her thoughts, looking up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had somehow helped a little girl understand what medical professionals and experienced detectives had failed to recognize. Sometimes the most important truths came from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes it took a child and a dog to see what adults couldn't. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that marked a high-profile case. But beneath the surface energy, Prosecutor Lisa Huang felt the familiar knot of anxiety that came with impossible legal puzzles. She sat in her corner office on the 15th floor, case files spread across her desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that had several crucial components missing, staring out at the Phoenix skyline while her mind wrestled with the most unusual challenge of her 12-year career. James Mitchell had confessed. The physical evidence supported the confession. Mrs. Henderson remained in critical but stable condition, her family demanding justice. By every normal standard, this should have been a straightforward vehicular assault case with a plea bargain and sentencing within 3 months. Except for Maya Rodriguez. The defense is going to tear us apart, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb said from his chair across from her desk, his normally perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. A 3-year-old witness who claimed she communicated with a police dog. Michael Park is probably practicing his closing arguments already about how we've lost our minds. Lisa rubbed her temples, feeling the onset of the headache that had been threatening all morning. She'd watched the video of Maya's statement 12 times, studying every gesture, every expression, every carefully articulated detail that had led directly to Mitchell's arrest. The child was credible, consistent, and remarkably precise in her observations. She was also 3 years old, which made her testimony legally admissible, but practically challenging in ways that kept Lisa awake at night. Have you read Arizona? Statute 134251? Webb continued, flipping through his legal pad. A child under 10 can testify if the court determines they understand the difference between truth and falsehood and comprehend the nature of an oath. But Maya is 3, Lisa. 3. Most kids that age still believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. The irony wasn't lost on Lisa. She had a witness whose observations had solved an impossible case, but whose age made her testimony vulnerable to exactly the kind of legal challenges that could destroy their prosecution. Worse, the media had caught wind of the story, and the phones in the DA's office had been ringing nonstop since yesterday afternoon. Channel 12 News had led their evening broadcast with Toddler Psychic Solves Hit-and-Run Case, complete with dramatic reenactments and expert commentary from a pet psychic who claimed children were naturally more attuned to animal communication. The Phoenix Sun's headline read, "Doggy Detective. 3-year-old claims police dog solved crime," accompanied by a photo of Maya and Rex that someone had taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. Lisa's phone buzzed with another call from a reporter, which she ignored. The media circus was exactly what she'd feared, a serious criminal case being reduced to tabloid sensationalism that would make it nearly impossible to seat an impartial jury. The defense filed their preliminary motions this morning, Webb said, sliding a thick folder across her desk. Park is challenging Maya's competency to testify, requesting psychological evaluation, and arguing that any testimony regarding alleged communication with a police dog should be excluded as fantastical and prejudicial. Lisa opened the folder and scanned Michael Park's filings, recognizing the defense attorney's typically aggressive strategy. Park was good one of the best criminal defense lawyers in Arizona, and he clearly recognized that attacking Maya's credibility was his best chance of getting Mitchell's confession thrown out as fruit of a poisonous tree. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, just 4 days away. Judge Patricia Hernandez would need to determine whether Maya was competent to testify and whether her unusual claims about communicating with Rex were admissible evidence or childhood fantasy that would prejudice the jury against proper legal standards. What does Dr. Torres say about Maya's psychological evaluation? Lisa asked, referring to the child psychologist they brought in to assess Maya's reliability as a witness. Webb consulted his notes. Dr. Torres is cautiously optimistic. Maya demonstrates above-average cognitive development for her age, shows no signs of fantasy disorder or suggestibility to leading questions, and consistently maintains her account of events without embellishment. But he paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. But what? Dr. Torres also notes that Maya's claims about communicating with Rex, while certainly not supernatural, represent a child's interpretation of observing the dog's behavior and scent reactions. The problem is Maya genuinely believes she and Rex were having a conversation. She's not lying or making things up. She's describing her perception of events in the only language a 3-year-old has available. Lisa leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of her. Maya's testimony was crucial without it. They had Mitchell's confession. But any decent defense attorney could argue that a diabetic episode constituted diminished capacity, potentially reducing charges from vehicular assault to reckless driving with a medical exemption. But with Maya's testimony, they could demonstrate Mitchell's consciousness of guilt in fleeing the scene, establish a timeline that proved he was aware enough to make deliberate choices, and provide corroborating evidence that strengthened every aspect of their case. The victim's family is asking for updates, Webb added quietly. Mrs. Henderson's daughter called this morning. She wants to know if we're really going to base their mother's case on a toddler who talks to dogs. Lisa closed her eyes, imagining the conversation she'd need to have with Mrs. Henderson's family about their unusual star witness. How do you explain to grieving relatives that their best hope for justice rests on convincing a jury to believe a 3-year-old's interpretation of police dog behavior? Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Judge Hernandez's chambers. Lisa answered immediately, her pulse quickening. Counselor, Judge Hernandez's voice was crisp and professional. I've reviewed the preliminary motions in state. V. Mitchell, this is certainly the most unusual case I've encountered in 22 years on the bench. I'm scheduling a closed preliminary hearing for tomorrow afternoon to evaluate the child witness's competency. I want both sides prepared to present expert testimony about childhood development, memory formation, and the admissibility of unusual witness testimony. Yes, Your Honor. We'll be ready. Good. And Ms. Huang? I'm issuing a gag order effective immediately. This media circus ends now. I won't have my courtroom turned into a sideshow. As Lisa hung up the phone, she realized that in less than 24 hours, the future of their case would depend on convincing one of Arizona's most skeptical judges that a 3-year-old girl's observations about a police dog's behavior constituted reliable evidence in a felony prosecution. Webb looked at her expectantly. So what's our strategy? Lisa straightened the files on her desk and reached for her legal pad. We're going to prove that sometimes the most unlikely witnesses tell the most important truths. And we're going to make sure Maya Rodriguez gets the chance to speak for Mrs. Henderson when Mrs. Henderson can't speak for herself. Outside her office window, a phoenix sun blazed mercilessly over a city that had no idea it was about to witness one of the most unusual legal proceedings in Arizona history. The specialized child interview room at the Maricopa County Family Court looked more like a pediatrician's waiting area than part of a courthouse. Soft pastel walls decorated with hand-painted murals of farm animals, miniature furniture sized for small bodies, and an impressive collection of toys that had been carefully selected by child psychologists to put young witnesses at ease. Dr. Amanda Torres had spent 15 years working with traumatized children, but she'd never faced a case quite like Maya Rodriguez. Maya sat cross-legged on a rainbow-colored carpet, methodically arranging a set of toy cars in what appeared to be a complex traffic pattern while humming a Spanish lullaby her grandmother sang at bedtime. Her dark hair was pulled back in pigtails, secured with butterfly clips, and she wore a yellow sundress that made her look even smaller than her 3 years suggested. Beside her, Rex lay in the Sphinx position, his massive head resting on his paws, watching Maya's every movement with the patient attention of a devoted guardian. Maya, Dr. Torres said gently, settling onto a child-sized chair that made her feel like Alice in Wonderland. Do you know why we're here today? Maya looked up from her cars, her expression serious but untroubled. Because grown-ups need to know, I tell the truth about the scared man and Rex's nose thoughts, she replied matter-of-factly. Abuela says some people think kids make up stories. But I don't make up stories about real things. Dr. Torres exchanged a glance with prosecutor Lisa Huang, who sat quietly in the corner taking notes. Maya's matter-of-fact distinction between fantasy and reality was remarkable for a child her age. But would it be enough to convince Judge Hernandez that her testimony was reliable? Maya, if I told you that Rex could fly like a bird, would that be true or not true? Maya giggled, looking at Rex with obvious affection. Silly. Rex can't fly. Dogs don't have wings. That's not true. What if I told you that you had ice cream for breakfast this morning? Not true. Maya shook her head emphatically. I had cereal with strawberries and milk. Ice creams for after dinner if I eat all my vegetables. Dr. Torres continued the evaluation for another hour, using age-appropriate questions and scenarios to test Maya's understanding of truth versus falsehood, her memory retention, and her susceptibility to suggestion. Throughout the session, Maya remained consistent, clear, and remarkably grounded in reality, despite her young age. Now, Maya, Dr. Torres said as they neared the end of the session, tell me about what happened with Rex at the accident. Maya's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more focused and serious. She moved closer to Rex, her small hand resting on his fur as if drawing strength from the contact. Rex smelled something important that day. When I whispered to him about the scared man, he made his listening sound, the whine that means, yes, I understand. Dogs smell feelings and sickness that people can't smell. How do you know Rex understood you? Maya tilted her head, considering the question with the gravity of a philosopher. The same way Abuela knows I'm sad even when I don't cry. The same way Rex knows when Detective Chan is worried about something. We don't use words for everything, sometimes we use heart language. Dr. Torres felt a chill run down her spine. Maya wasn't claiming supernatural communication. She was describing the kind of intuitive understanding that existed between humans and animals, translated through a 3-year-old's limited vocabulary into something that sounded magical, but was actually quite profound. Meanwhile, across town in the Maricopa County Courthouse, defense attorney Michael Park was preparing his own strategy with the methodical precision of a surgeon planning a complex operation. His office walls were covered with photographs of the accident scene, witness statements, and psychological profiles of child witnesses in previous cases. Park had built his reputation on finding the weak points in prosecution cases, and Maya Rodriguez represented the kind of vulnerability he could exploit. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Park practiced his opening statement to an empty conference room. The prosecution asks you to believe that a 3-year-old child received mystical communications from a police dog that solved a criminal case. This isn't a courtroom, it's Disneyland. This isn't justice, it's fantasy. Park's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. He wouldn't attack Maya's character or suggest she was deliberately lying. Instead, he would emphasize her age, her vivid imagination, and the impossibility of dog-human telepathic communication. He would paint the prosecution as desperate lawyers grasping at supernatural straws, rather than building a case on solid evidence. But as Park reviewed the case files for the 100th time, he couldn't shake his unease about one crucial detail. Maya's observations had led directly to James Mitchell's arrest and confession. Fantasy witnesses didn't usually solve real crimes with such precise accuracy. Back at the Rodriguez house, Rosa Martinez was having her own struggles with the approaching trial. The media attention had been overwhelming, reporters camping outside their house, photographers with telephoto lenses trying to capture images of Maya playing in the backyard, and phone calls from television producers offering money for exclusive interviews. Mia doesn't understand why strangers want to talk to her so much, Rosa confided to Detective Chun during one of her regular visits. She thinks they want to meet Rex, not hear about the accident. Detective Chun watched through the kitchen window as Maya and Rex played an elaborate game of hide-and-seek in the backyard, the massive dog pretending he couldn't find the giggling child behind the lemon tree that barely concealed her yellow dress. How is she handling all this? Detective Chun asked. Better than the adults, Rosa replied with a rueful smile. She asked me yesterday if the sad man with hurt fingers was feeling better now. I told her the police found him and he was getting help, and she said good. Rex was worried about him too. Then she went back to coloring her princess book like nothing happened. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the next morning, and Detective Chun knew that Maya's entire future as a witness depended on Judge Hernandez's decision about her competency. The legal team had done everything possible to prepare Dr. Torres would testify about Maya's psychological evaluation. Detective Chun would explain Rex's training and behavior, and they'd even consulted with animal behavior experts to provide scientific context for Maya's observations. But ultimately, it would come down to whether a skeptical judge could accept that a 3-year-old's interpretation of police dog behavior constituted reliable evidence in a felony case. That evening, as Detective Chun prepared to leave the Rodriguez house, Maya ran up to her with a hand-drawn picture stick figures representing herself, Rex, and Detective Chun standing together under a rainbow with the word truth written in crayon across the top in Rose's careful handwriting. "This is for tomorrow," Maya said seriously, pressing the drawing into Detective Chun's hands, "to remind everyone that Rex and I saw the real truth." Looking down at the simple drawing, Detective Chun felt a surge of determination. Tomorrow, they would find out if the truth, as seen through the eyes of a child and the nose of a dog, was enough to convince the Arizona justice system. The Maricopa County Superior Courthouse had witnessed thousands of dramatic moments over its 30-year history, but nothing quite like the scene unfolding in Judge Patricia Hernandez's courtroom on this sweltering Phoenix morning. Despite the gag order that had limited media access, every seat in the gallery was filled with court personnel, law students, and legal observers who had heard whispers about the dog whisperer case that was about to test the boundaries of Arizona's evidence. Laws. Maya Rodriguez sat in a specially designed witness chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her 3-year-old frame, her feet dangling several inches above the floor, despite the wooden footrest that bailiff Martinez had hastily constructed the night before. She wore a powder blue dress that Rosa had chosen specifically because it was Maya's truth-telling dress, the outfit she wore to important family gatherings where grown-up honesty was required. Beside the witness stand, Rex lay in perfect position, his massive German Shepherd frame completely still except for his intelligent eyes that tracked every movement. In the courtroom, with the alertness of a professional who understood the gravity of the moment, Detective Sarah Chun had spent 2 hours that morning brushing his coat and checking his equipment, knowing that Rex's appearance and behavior would be scrutinized as carefully as any piece of evidence. Judge Hernandez, a stern woman in her 50s, whose reputation for no-nonsense courtroom management had earned her respect throughout the Arizona legal community, looked down at Maya with an expression that mixed judicial skepticism with grandmotherly concern. In 22 years on the bench, she had never faced the challenge of evaluating testimony that hinged on alleged communication between a toddler and a police dog. "Maya," Judge Hernandez began, her voice gentle but authoritative, "do you understand that you need to tell the truth here today?" Maya nodded solemnly, her small hands folded in her lap in the way Rosa had taught her for important occasions. "Yes, Your Honor. Abuela says lying in court is like lying to God, and I don't lie to God or judges or police ladies." A soft murmur of amusement rippled through the gallery before Judge Hernandez's sharp look restored silence. "Prosecutor Lisa." Huang rose from her table, her normally perfect composure betraying subtle signs of the pressure she was feeling. The past 3 weeks had been a legal nightmare of precedent research, expert consultations, and media management, all building toward this moment when Maya's credibility would determine the strength of their entire case against James Mitchell. "Maya," Huang began carefully, "can you tell the court what you saw on the day Mrs. Henderson was hurt?" Maya's expression became focused and serious, the transformation remarkable in someone so young. "I was eating chocolate ice cream on Albala's porch when the scared man's car hit the nice lady with the groceries. The car was silver and made unhappy noises. And the scared man was crying because his hand was hurt and he felt sick wrong inside. How do you know the man was feeling sick wrong? Maya turned to look at Rex, who had remained perfectly motionless throughout her testimony. Rex smelled it. Dogs can smell when people's bodies are making wrong chemistry. Like when Grandpa's sugar was too high and he smelled sweet sour. Defense attorney Michael Park had been taking furious notes, waiting for his opportunity to pounce. He was a formidable presence in his tailored suit and silver hair, with the kind of commanding courtroom presence that had intimidated witnesses for over 2 decades. But as he studied Maya's earnest face and consistent demeanor, he felt the first stirrings of doubt about his strategy. Maya, Park began during cross-examination, his voice carefully modulated to avoid appearing threatening to such a young witness. You said Rex told you things about the man in the car, but dogs can't really talk to people, can they? Maya looked at Park with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a confused adult. Rex doesn't use mouth words like people. He uses nose language and body language. When I told him about the scared man with hurt fingers, Rex made his understanding sound and did his alert sitting. That's how he says, yes, I know that smell. I know that feeling. But Maya, isn't it possible you imagined that Rex was talking to you? Maya considered this question with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice pondering constitutional law. She looked at Rex again, then back at Park, her 3-year-old logic operating with startling clarity. Mr. Lawyer, she said, using the formal address Rosa had taught her for court. When you see someone crying, do you ask them what's wrong, or do you just know they're sad? Park found himself genuinely surprised by the question. I would know they're sad from their expression. That's nose language for dogs. Rex sees with his nose the way you see with your eyes. I don't imagine Rex's nose thoughts any more than you imagine someone's sad face. The courtroom fell silent as the profound simplicity of Maya's explanation settled over everyone present. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the child's remarkable ability to articulate complex concepts in accessible terms. Maya, Huang continued, can you show the court what you mean about Rex's alert sitting? Maya looked questioningly at Judge Hernandez, who nodded permission. Rex, Maya said in her clear 3-year-old voice, show them about the scared man's smell. What happened next would be discussed in legal circles for years to come. Rex immediately rose from his lying position, walked with purposeful strides directly to the defendant's table, where James Mitchell sat between his public defender and a probation officer, and assumed the precise alert position he used for diabetic detection, sitting perfectly erect, ears forward, eyes focused intently on Mitchell. The effect was electric. Mitchell, who had been struggling to maintain his composure throughout Maya's testimony, began sobbing uncontrollably. She's right, he said through his tears, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. I was in diabetic shock. I was scared and sick, and I couldn't think straight. Everything she said is true. Judge Hernandez called for order as whispers erupted throughout the gallery. Defense attorney Park looked stunned, his carefully prepared cross-examination suddenly irrelevant in the face of Rex's demonstration and Mitchell's emotional breakdown. Your Honor, Mitchell continued, rising unsteadily to his feet despite his attorney's attempts to quiet him. That little girl and that dog saw the truth that I was too scared to admit. I wasn't drunk or reckless. I was medically impaired and too proud to ask for help. They saw what everyone else missed. Dr. Amanda Torres, watching from the gallery, scribbled notes frantically as she witnessed something unprecedented in her 15 years of working with child witnesses. Maya had not only provided accurate testimony about complex medical and behavioral observations, but she had also demonstrated a level of credibility that transcended her age through the simple authenticity of her relationship with Rex as judge. Hernandez called for a 30-minute recess to consider the unprecedented testimony. Maya remained in the witness chair, gently petting Rex's head as he returned to her side. "Did I tell the truth good enough?" she asked Lisa Huang quietly. Huang knelt beside the witness chair, feeling tears prick her eyes as she realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary, not supernatural communication between a child and a dog, but the kind of pure, uncomplicated honesty that could cut through legal complexity and reveal essential truths that adults often missed in their pursuit of sophisticated explanations. "Yes, Maya," Huang whispered. "You told the truth perfectly." 6 months after the extraordinary courtroom scene that would be studied in law schools for decades to come, the Phoenix sun cast long shadows across the rehabilitation garden at St. Joseph's Medical Center, where Margaret Henderson sat in a wheelchair, slowly regaining strength in her legs, while feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks in the small pond that served as therapy for recovering patients. The elderly woman's recovery had been remarkable. Doctors had initially feared permanent paralysis, but her determination and an exceptional medical team had helped her progress from unconsciousness to tentative steps with a walker. Beside her sat James Mitchell, no longer the terrified, broken man who had fled the scene of an accident in diabetic shock. His left hand bore faint scars from the construction accident that had triggered the chain of events leading to this unlikely friendship. But his eyes held a clarity that had been missing during those dark weeks of guilt and fear. He came to visit Mrs. Henderson every Tuesday and Friday, part of a restorative justice program that Judge Hernandez had designed specifically for their case. "The ducks are getting fat," Mrs. Henderson observed with a smile, watching a particularly rotund mallard waddle importantly around the pond's edge. "You spoil them as much as my grandchildren do." Mitchell laughed softly, a sound that still felt strange to him after months of grief and remorse. "My therapist says caring for something helps with the healing process. Though I think you and the ducks are doing more healing for me than I'm doing for anyone." The sentencing phase of Mitchell's case had been as unprecedented as Maya's testimony. Judge Hernandez had crafted a punishment that emphasized rehabilitation over retribution. 2 years of supervised probation, extensive community service focused on diabetic education and driving safety, mandatory medical monitoring of his diabetes, management, and participation in the restorative justice program that brought him face to face with the consequences of his actions. More importantly, Mitchell had become an advocate for medical awareness in transportation safety. He spoke at diabetes support groups, driver education classes, and medical conferences about the dangers of driving with unmanaged blood sugar levels. His story had been featured in the American Diabetes Association's newsletter, and he'd helped develop new protocols for construction workers managing chronic conditions in high-stress environments. "I've been thinking about that little girl again," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thoughtful as she watched the ducks. "Maya, the one who saw what really happened that day." Mitchell nodded, his expression growing serious. Detective Chun told me she's doing well. Back to normal 3-year-old things, coloring books, playground games, driving her grandmother crazy with endless questions about everything. What neither of them mentioned, but both understood, was the profound impact Maya's testimony had on the legal community. The case had been written up in law journals, cited in children's rights advocacy papers, and used as a case study in courses on non-traditional evidence. Dr. Amanda Torres had published a groundbreaking paper on childhood observation skills that challenged conventional assumptions about young witnesses, while Rex had become something of a celebrity in police dog training circles. Detective Sarah Chun had been promoted to sergeant and now headed a specialized unit that worked with child witnesses and victims. She developed new protocols for interviewing young children that incorporated animal-assisted therapy techniques. Inspired by watching Maya's natural communication with Rex, the Phoenix Police department had expanded their canine program to include therapy work, with Rex leading the initiative. But perhaps the most significant change had occurred in Maya herself, or rather, in how others perceived her remarkable abilities. Child psychologists from 3 universities had studied her case, not as a supernatural phenomenon, but as an example of how children's unfiltered observation skills could complement trained animal senses to reveal truths that adult logic might miss. Maya, now approaching her 4th birthday, remained blissfully unaware of her impact on Arizona's legal system. She continued her regular visits with Rex, though Detective Chun was careful to maintain them as social calls rather than professional interactions. The massive German Shepherd had become something of a permanent fixture in the Rodriguez household, with Rosa joking that she now had 2 grandchildren to spoil. On this particular afternoon, Maya sat in her grandmother's garden, carefully watering the tomato plants while Rex supervised from the shade of the lemon tree. She was explaining to the dog, in her characteristic mix of English and Spanish, why vegetables needed water, but rocks didn't, a philosophical discourse that Rex received with his usual patient attention. "Myra, Rex," Maya said, pointing to a butterfly that had landed on one of the tomato blossoms. "Pretty things come when you take care of growing things. Abuela says that's like people too." Detective Chun, who had stopped by for her weekly check-in, watched this interaction with the same sense of wonder she'd felt that first day, when Maya had whispered urgently into Rex's ear. She'd never fully understood what had happened between the child and the dog, but she'd learned that some truths didn't need complete understanding to be valuable. The legal precedent established by Maya's testimony had opened doors for other non-traditional witnesses and evidence. A case in Tucson had successfully used testimony from an elderly man with Alzheimer's whose fragmented memories, when carefully corroborated, had provided crucial evidence in a fraud case. In Flagstaff, a service dog's behavior had been admitted as evidence in a domestic violence trial when the animal's trained responses revealed patterns of aggression that human witnesses had missed. Maya's case had taught the legal community that truth could emerge from unexpected sources, that children's observations could be both innocent and profound, and that the bond between humans and animals sometimes revealed information that traditional investigation methods couldn't uncover. As the sun set over Phoenix, casting the desert landscape in shades of gold and purple that made the city look almost magical, Maya finished watering the garden and settled beside Rex for what had become their evening ritual, a quiet conversation that no one else could hear, but everyone could see was genuine, important, and somehow essential to both participants. "Tell me about today, Rex," Maya said softly, her small hand buried in his thick fur. "Did you help anyone feel safer?" Rex made a low, rumbling sound that might have been contentment, might have been communication, or might have been both. Maya nodded seriously, apparently satisfied with whatever answer she'd received. Detective Chun smiled, remembering something Dr. Torres had said during Maya's evaluation. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in languages we don't fully understand, between individuals who see the world more clearly than the rest of us. Years later, when Maya grew up to become a veterinary therapist, specializing in animal-assisted therapy for trauma victims, she would remember that first conversation with Rex, not as the moment she solved a crime, but as the day she learned that truth was something you recognized with your heart rather than proved with your words. And Rex, in whatever dreams old police dogs have, would remember a little girl who listened to his nose thoughts and helped him speak for justice when justice needed a voice. In the end, nobody had seen it coming, a 3-year-old's pure observation, and a police dog's trained instincts combining to reveal a truth that changed how Arizona's courts understood the nature of reliable testimony. But perhaps the most remarkable thing wasn't that it happened, but that once it did, it seemed perfectly natural that truth would choose such unlikely messengers to make itself known.